What up, fam? I'm Dr. DeLuna, and you are listening to Drop It Like It's Doc podcast. Today, I have on Dr. Cam. He is a chiropractic neurologist, to be precise. And if you don't know what that is, you are going to want to watch this episode because we talk all about the brain in great detail as far as things that you could do to support brain health, why we are both not a fan of medicating your way to wash away symptoms, and a lot of things that you might not even have thought are actually rooted in brain health. If you are someone with anxiety, depression, ADHD, Tourette's, if you've ever hit your little head, you're going to want to watch this episode. It is full of so many nerdy truth bombs. Hello, Kamran.
Hello, Ashley.
I am so honored to have you in the jungle room and to talk all about you and your story and the brain and functional neurology and everything.
I'm pretty pumped to be here in the jungle.
Yes. So Kamran is a chiropractor, and we're going to probably talk a little bit about chiropractic, but probably not. We're going to talk all about the brain, functional neurology, things that you see in your practice. But before we get into all of that, because I really don't know much about your story at all, I would love to just talk about what functional neurology is and how you came to this place in your life and in your career, starting from chiropractic.
So, man, the elevator talk for functional neurology. To try to nutshell it, it's a way to approach neuro rehab and neuro evaluation from more of a functional stance. Kind of the way you have functional medicine and you're looking at labs and you're looking more for patterns and everything that's in the gray area, as opposed to just the black and white, people being healthy and people having pathology or disease. Mm-hmm. We're doing the same thing or applying that with neurology. The specialty was originally developed by a guy named Ted Carrick, and he's a good mentor for our whole profession. And basically, essentially, the way we look at it, we run through a thorough history with people. We then run through a full neurological exam or bedside exam. So everything that a neurologist learns and an ENT, vestibular therapist, all those different specialties on how to evaluate the brain, brainstem, spinal cord. And then when we find certain patterns that are off or not running at optimal, that's what we try to target and give specific treatments or therapies for to try to optimize function and see how that translates into their symptoms. Mm-hmm. Typically, when we see that stuff improve, we see symptoms improve.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was just how did you find functional neurology starting your life in chiropractic?
That was, if I'm being candid, it was a little bit of dumb luck.
Yeah, no, please, always be candid.
So I got into the chiropractic profession because I was already into health and fitness. And then I was trying to search for where my path was going to go. And I had some good friends tell me, take the time over the summer and try to figure out a different career, because originally I was going to become a realtor or get into mortgage because that's what the family does.
Gotcha.
So I was like, okay, I really don't love this. I need to figure out what is my thing. And went and shadowed a chiropractor who's a friend of my brother's, and he's actually a sports chiropractor, which I didn't know much about chiropractic at that time. But in addition to the fact that I had no idea that there was like sports specialties and stuff like that. So when I went and shadowed him, it was really interesting. I was watching him work with athletes. I was like, yeah, I'm totally into this. You don't have to work at a desk 9 to 5. You're up and moving around. You develop your own technique. You get to work with athletes. I'm like, this is it. So I went down that path, tried to do a few different schools out, but then ended up landing in the Bay Area at Life West. And basically the first year I was there, a lot of the curriculum was kind of review for me because the prereqs that I had taken prior to were so thorough. Mm-hmm. So I got a little bored and I decided to seek out extra education. And I couldn't get the sports specialty right off the bat, which is what they call a diplomate. So it's kind of similar to the way MDs have fellowships. Mm-hmm. We have a sports diplomate, and then there's also a neurology diplomate. So I'd heard about the neurology diplomate, and someone had mentioned that they had gone to one of the courses and said that you can start right off the bat. So my second month in chiropractic college, I jumped right into the neurology program, and I'd say 90% of the stuff was over my head, but I found it insanely interesting. And the guy that was teaching it, who's still a mentor of mine till this day, his name's Glenn Zielinski. He had the flu, and he was sitting the whole time, and he was teaching off a PowerPoint. So for it to still blow away the whole class was like said a lot about the subject matter. So from there, it really like in that class, I got some answers as to stuff that I had been dealing with growing up. So little about me, when I think it was kindergarten or first grade, I got diagnosed with Tourette's. And way back then, they didn't really know much about the condition. So it's Tourette's and ADHD, which they tend to go together along with anxiety, OCD. So they're all kind of bundled into one deal. But so I was dealing with Tourette's, and I ended up coming to find that back then it was potentially triggered by an antibiotic that I took. So I had taken penicillin. I had a really bad reaction. From right after that happened, I went cross-eyed. And then I was blinking like constantly. So I had developed these tics. So if you don't know what Tourette's is, it's a condition where, you know, you have multiple tics to get diagnosed, and these things tend to evolve and shift as time goes on. And yeah, I was dealing with that at that time. And a lot of the physicians that I had gone to, so they tried pushing different medications, they tried pushing different therapies, like cognitive work, all these different strategies to try to help me chill this out, but nothing really ever moved the needle. And then as time went on, that's actually what really pushed, or what motivated me to stay in health and fitness, or like really seek it out. I had done some weight training with a friend and found that when I was done weight training, my brain was finally calm. Like that was the one moment where I finally felt aligned and like I could focus. And I leveraged that after I'd work out for like 2 to 3 hours, and then the tics would start to ramp back up. But anyways, going back, I had these tics and Tourette's, and I went to this program, and the professor or the doc went through the pathways of how it works. And historically, when I was talking to these other physicians growing up, they would tell me that it's a weak immune system, or, you know, it's just anxiety based or whatever it is. Like they had all these really poor, uneducated responses, in my opinion. They didn't know much about the disorder at all, and it didn't seem like they had studied it at all either, like for what resources were out there. So for him to teach it like in the state that he was in, and then give me answers like that, I was like, there's no way that I can unsee what just happened. I have to practice this way. So
that's amazing. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
And I completely forgot that I always start this by love bombing the person that I am with. So you get to receive this, and I get to integrate in some of that. So I remember when I first met you, Kamran. I remember when I met you. It was you came to some event with Nikki Frangudis. You were there. Anyway, you just came in and you were so poised and put together, and you seemed like a fucking genius, and you are a genius. But then I was able to shadow you, and I remember I asked you and your partner if I could come shadow you, because I was already just blown away, similar to how you were with this world of functional neurology, because it was spring of my freshman year of medical school. Datis Karazian taught my just neuroanatomy class. And he comes in, and instead of teaching anatomy, I mean, he taught it to us. We did dissection with him. He showed us patient videos of patients coming in with whatever concern that they had, whatever symptom that they were labeled with, that they could not get to the bottom of, that they had seen thousands of practitioners for it, spent so much money, so much energy trying to get the bottom of. And within 5 minutes of doing a distinct exam, he could figure out the pathway, turn it off or turn it on, whatever needed to happen, and they would walk out a completely new person. I could not unsee what I saw either. And it blew me open to just this world of understanding the root cause my first year of medical school in a very different way than we're taught in naturopathic medicine, because we're taught to do it with the blood and the immune system and hormones, but it was very different than the neuroconnectivity and whatnot. And you were just so open to teach these little baby students and open to helping us understand what you did and why you did it and how you did it. You even worked with a lot of my friends one-on-one and actually changed their lives, whether you're aware of it or not, just helping them, just function better in their day-to-day life and get through a program like medical school. But I am truly forever grateful that you allowed me to be in your space, in your practice, as just a little curious student, asking you questions, watching you work your magic, because it's just helped inspire me on the deepest level of healing that a person can have, and how beautiful that you experience that. Because I work with so many people that have been given a diagnosis of Tourette's or ADHD or, autism, and they're told this is just, you have this option. This is the option that you have. You can take this medication forever, or these are ways that you can function in your life to minimize that symptom. But you change people's brains. And even just some of the stories that I saw and the patients that I saw in your practice, from when they would come to when they would leave, because you and Steve, you would leave the room and then it would just be me and the patient sitting there talking. They would rave about you. They would rave about how their life is different from seeing you. So I just wanted you to know that you are truly changing people's lives. And I think that you do know that, but maybe you need to hear it more.
That was a bomb.
That was a bomb. Welcome to the jungle. You're welcome.
And likewise, I love the naturopathic profession and how much it's done for patients. And you can't have brain function without the chemistry, though. So you can't separate it. There's no hierarchy in this stuff. But when you combine them both, it's a pretty powerful shift that you can have.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe let's start there too, because for you to even get a pathway to fire in your brain, you have to make sure that metabolically things are sound.
Yes.
So what are some things that you see in your practice that are impacting that directly? Because I know in my practice, I see a lot of blood sugar issues, a lot of people that just don't move, so they're not even getting blood flow to their brain, let alone their hands and feet that are constantly freezing. But I would love to know some things that you see.
This is loaded.
I know, it's loaded.
Where do I start? Yeah, so like you said, blood sugar dysregulation, really big one. Anemia can be huge. Yeah, if you're not getting proper fuel delivery or oxygenation to tissues, that's going to change the endurance level. That's going to change the way they heal. Chronic stress, stress chemistry. So anytime somebody's just pumping cortisol on a consistent basis, or that's starting to become intolerant to their own cortisol and all that kind of stuff, it changes the way the brain works, and it changes how you can grow it and strengthen it, the ability to repair it. We see a lot of infections that make a big difference. They're the worst. It's a pain in the butt. But we've gotten pretty good, I think, at picking it out at this point, that somebody's dealing with something like mold or Lyme or whatever it might be, and funneling them to the right people right off the bat.
Yeah.
Other things, just the basic foundational stuff like dehydration too, lack of sleep, like those pillars. If you're not moving around, like all that kind of stuff impacts the ability to repair and heal.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the main stuff. Oh, toxin load too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in naturopathic medicine, we call them the foundations of health for a reason, because I have a lot of individuals that come to me and they want, they saw on TikTok or some bullshit fucking social media thing, I want to take this supplement because I hear it's going to boost my brain and whatnot. And how can we do that if you're not even drinking water? How can we do that if you're living in a house that is very contaminated with mold? How can we do that if you don't even eat real food? So I love that those are things that you see. And what do you see on a clinical standpoint that would make you think that someone does have something metabolic going on that's influencing their neurological symptoms?
Depending on the condition that's coming in, they're potentially going to have a set of symptoms that they might present with and findings that we might see. So it's usually coupling the two that helps guide us into, hey, this is potentially going to be a mold case, or you sound like you're having Lyme or a co-infection. Because there's unique, some symptoms overlap with other conditions, but there are certain ones that are unique to certain scenarios. Like you'll often hear from certain people with, I can't remember which co-infection it is, but Lyme with co-infections where they get the internal vibrations, the tremoring. Historically, always there's going to be some sort of Lyme there. Typically, you might find mold with it too, or coupled with it.
Yeah.
And then you might see, you've got certain patients that, like with COVID recently, right? that are going to express that they're feeling lightheaded, palpitations, all these things. And then you're going to end up finding POTS or dysautonomia with them. So things like that, basically. Yeah. So it's usually always going to be coupled history with the exam findings, and then that kind of clues us in.
And I want to just stress to the listeners that to see someone like Cam or to see a functional neurologist, you don't have to have this big, gnarly neurological condition going on. It could be something as simple as anxiety. It could be something as simple as dizziness, vertigo. I see that a lot, and it could be, from a neurological standpoint. And for me, when I was doing the whole functional neurology thing in med school, I would volunteer myself for everything because I wanted to know what was going on with me.
That sounds like you.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like me. I want to know. I'm like, I have these incredible, brilliant minds that will tell me something about me. Sounds fabulous. And I had a lot of things come up for me, frontal lobe and cerebellum. And I would love if we could walk through the brain in a little bit and talk about things that could come up. But now that I think back to it, during that time, I was living in such a moldy house. I was, Bastier, is full of mold. It's horrible. So now it's just interesting to kind of look back on that time of my life and the symptoms that I was having and how much were related to inflammation in my brain, just from weak areas that, based on how I developed and my history, but that were just louder because of the incredible amount of neuroinflammation I had, the incredible amount of stress. I was vegan at the time, which is hilarious now because I'm basically a carnivore. Very different. A lot has changed, Kamran. But yeah, just so much mold here.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, so before I was here, I was in Portland, and I was the guy that taught me that first course. He was the doc that I was like shadowing under, or it was basically like a residency that I had set up for myself in a sense, because chiropractors don't have it. So I was there for 2 years in Portland, and that's when my health was at its worst too. I got hit with mold multiple times because each of the houses that I ended up living with exception to like one apartment, had mold issues for sure. And the neuroinflammation would drive my tics up.
I was going to ask if you saw them come back.
Anxiety, tics, ADHD, the whole thing would just get wound up. But in addition to like chronic pain, all that kind of stuff, like my injuries were not healing anymore. I couldn't go to the gym without being sore for weeks.
Yes.
I was playing lacrosse at the time. I had an old rib injury that lasted 1.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Nothing broke.
Yeah.
Just wouldn't heal.
Yes.
So, yeah.
It'll get you.
Pretty crazy what inflammation can do.
I know. It's sad. And inflammation in the brain just makes everything confusing.
Yeah. But to preface, or just to be fully, I had some pretty bad stress chemistry at that time too. Because I was definitely overworking myself and like taking home patient,
Yes.
Yeah. So my stress chemistry was way off too. So it set me up for other stuff too.
Yeah.
Because you can take one person and put them in a moldy environment and put another one, and they'll have completely different responses, right?
For sure, yeah.
So there's got to be reasons why, and I would like to think that stress chemistry is definitely part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Detox, stress chemistry for sure. I mean, if you are running on cortisol, then your whole immune system's going to be suppressed as well. And then all the fun little chronic infections can come out to play as well. So it's a little soup in there of sorts.
Disgusting soup.
A disgusting soup, yes. So I would like to go back to the part of the story where you were talking about how you learned the pathways of Tourette's and tics in the brain.
Yeah.
So because I know you're a genius and I know that you know all of this off the top of your head, you are. Can you walk us through just like a pathway that would cause something like that to happen, and then what you activate or turn off to shift that presentation?
Interesting. Yeah, we can use Tourette's for sure. With Tourette's, the area that we suspect is involved or theorize right now, the school of thought is that it's happening in what's called your basal ganglia. And your basal ganglia is kind of like a gas pedal, brake pedal. Okay. Gas pedal, you get movement or action or whatever type of motor activity, speech, thought, all those kinds of things that you're in control of, right? And then brake pedal would be being able to calm down or like not have any movement, just chill, not do anything, right? So you're having both of these go at any given moment on a consistent basis with everything that you're doing, okay? And it is a subconscious thing and conscious thing at the same time. There's many loops that go through it. For tics in general or Tourette's, it involves that area quite a bit, and then coupled with what's called the ventral striatum. where there's a lot of, you start moving into that in the upper brainstem, there's a lot of dopamine production with all these pathways. It's a dopaminergic network. So that's the main driving piece. But going back to just gas, brake. When you have tics or Tourette's, it's excessive movement. It's excessive gas pedal, okay? And basically the theories are that there's dysfunction with either the brake pedal or there's too much gas, basically, that's happening with it. And one of the reasons that it can happen is due to autoimmunity. So that's what I'm suspecting happened with me, is that the antibiotics triggered an autoimmune reaction, which potentially chewed up some of the receptors that allow you to have the brake pedal. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, there are many things many systems that feed into that gas pedal that help you pump the brakes, that don't have to just be directly through those receptors. One of them being the frontal lobe. So when you do something that requires a heavy amount of focus, or really can activate that part of the frontal lobe, or activate the frontal lobe in general, that can feed into that brake pedal, you can potentially slow down the gas or start pumping it a little bit more. In addition to that, just acting as if nobody knows anything about the frontal lobes. Yeah, no one knows anything. Yeah. A lot of things that it's in charge of: focused attention, mood regulation, behavior control, movement of the body and the eyes, focus, all these kinds of things, okay? In addition to the frontal lobes, there's another region that sits on the back of the skull. It's called your cerebellum. You had mentioned it. It is in charge of mainly balance and coordination, but there's a lot of things that feed in through that system. But balance and coordination, that system basically helps sequence all movements. And they suspect that there's actually good literature showing that it helps sequence thoughts and all of these types of things as well. So if you are trying to look up or trying to figure out a way to address things like tics or Tourette's, sometimes it can be really effective to figure out how you strengthen these two areas. How can you build these up? Because I actually found this after the fact, once I was in school, that there's a paper that did an fMRI study on people with tics or Tourette's, and they showed two different samples. One group, they had grown out of their tics, quote unquote, and then the other group had persistent tics. And what they found is the group that had grown out of it had much higher volume or larger concentrations in their frontal lobes and their cerebellum. And I was like, that just matches up perfectly with what we had learned, So basically, that's my school of thought, that if you build those areas up, you can set yourself up for success. But that's only possible if you also are making sure you're addressing the inflammatory drivers. Yeah. Making sure that there's not something stirring up that system or lighting the fire, because you can't repair a house when it's on fire.
Correct.
So.
Yes. And that speaks to how earlier you were saying that when you would go to the gym, that's when you would have those few hours of relief, because you're working your frontal lobe with movement, with focus, concentration, your cerebellum, and coordinated movements and things. And exactly. I think for me growing up, I had horrible anxiety and didn't know I had anxiety, and I would bite my nails until they would bleed. I would pick my cuticles until they would bleed, and that's a basal ganglia tic of sorts. And my mom would drop me off to ballet, and I would dance for like 4 hours every night, and that would be my... Little did I know I was self-medicating that whole time.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Totally get it. Yeah, same. I actually didn't know I had anxiety until it went away. Yeah. Once it disappeared. And same thing with body tension, because again, it's Tourette's, it's tied into that gas pedal, and that gas pedal usually creates tension in the body. So I had chronic tension in my body, and I had no idea. I would go play sports and try to catch a ball or whatever it is, and people would always tell me soften touch, yeah. And I was like, they are. This is as relaxed as I get. Yeah. So once that stuff dissipated, I was like, wow, this is how people feel. Wild. Yeah.
I would love to talk about the cerebellum, because I feel like people don't talk about the cerebellum a lot. And then from there, we'll kind of take it into other regions of the brain. But you saying lighting on fire just made me really want to talk about the cerebellum, because, people may or may not realize that all the DUI tests are cerebellar tests. Yeah. So things like alcohol set the cerebellum on fire. But let's just give us a little overview of this little I call it the cantaloupe. I call this the walnut and this the cantaloupe.
I might borrow that from you.
Yeah, please borrow anything. It would be an honor if you called it the cantaloupe.
So again, really powerful area in the brain, does amazing things to help regulate the system, and a lot more that are far reaching than most conventional therapists and doctors know. So, but on a conventional stance, like I was telling you, balance and coordination is what it's known for. The DUI tests are mainly testing that area, are focused on that. And the reason why is because that area is really sensitive to pH changes. So when alcohol shifts that pH towards more of an acidic range, it will start to atrophy some of the neurons.
Perfect.
So they actually shrink and
Good.
die off. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look at an individual that is actually like an alcoholic, you're going to find that the anterior lobe of the cerebellum actually shrinks quite a bit. And when you're drinking, you look at somebody their wide stance, with the way they walk, their slurring, their coordination's off. All that stuff is just all cerebellum just going,
Yeah.
you know. And then I can't remember the other part of your question.
I just wanted you to walk through the cerebellum a
The
little
overview.
bit. Yeah.
So other things that it's involved in, it really is a key piece that computes information from your inner ear.
Yes.
So the inner ear is a motion sensor, and it's also a static sensor, a positional sensor. So anytime I move my head or my body, even with my eyes closed, I know that I'm moving in part or in large part because of that inner ear, or your vestibular system, right? And that vestibular system is sending signals into your brainstem, but it also goes into your cerebellum. And that cerebellum acts as a calibration point, because none of us are made equal. We all have our asymmetries, and it's no different for different parts of our brain. So these receptors that are in our ear, these motion sensors, they're not usually equal either. They're firing at different rates, and our brain's job, or those central structures like the cerebellum, its job is to make sense out of that, make it so that we feel normal, so that we don't feel out of whack or disoriented. And when that area doesn't work properly and things are asymmetrical in the inner ear or some of the other spots, you might feel disoriented or dizzy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 So there's also really good research showing that the cerebellum is a key point that helps with regulating emotion as well. So specifically things like anxiety, it has its role in it.
Yeah.
It's a really important piece.
I'm just smirking because my sweet little cerebellum growing up was trashed. I remember my mom would drive, she was a violin teacher, and she would drive to music lessons that she was going to teach, and I'd be in the back of the car just trying to read because I was such a nerd, and I would throw up. I was so sick in the car.
Hey, I feel you.
Yeah, it was
I used
terrible.
to have motion sickness all the time.
Yeah, going on a boat. No more. So that might be something that.
Did you feel that before in the past? Like, did you ever feel the rocking sensation? Like,
Oh yeah, totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that anymore. And honestly, for me, a big reason why I think I don't feel that anymore, of course, I have done a lot of work because I've worked with people like you, and again, was the volunteer being like, what's wrong with me? And they'd be like, girl, your cerebellum, you need to do this, you have to do that. It forced me to actually work on core strength, forced me to I can now hold a plank. I can now do all sorts of core stuff. I have abs for the first time in my entire life. And that changed my life because now I have this internal stability, and I can feel when my cerebellum is on, and I can feel when my cerebellum is off, and my cerebellum is off anytime I am exposed to the slightest bit of gluten. What happens to me is that I feel drunk. I feel as if I am slurring my words. I will feel dizzy as I'm eating, and I'm aware of this in my body, so I choose not to consume it because, knowledge is power, and I know that it doesn't feel good for me, even though I'm Italian, and, everyone loves pizza and pasta and all the goodies, and good luck to anyone that tries to feed me that. But it's when I go out to eat and say that something was marinated in soy sauce because soy sauce has a lot of gluten in it. Or, if the server just wants to fuck with me because they think I'm kidding and I'm not kidding. And then I'm like, I'm drunk. Now my tongue feels inflamed. Was there gluten in this? And that's because of the neuroinflammation, because gluten hits the cerebellum pretty hard, right?
It does. And they actually have a term for it. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Gluten ataxia.
Gluten ataxia. Got it.
Whacks you out.
Yeah.
Screws up so many patients, and we are really big advocates on our dizzy patients going gluten-free.
Yeah.
And some of them still just take the hit. They don't want to, they understand the reality, and we're just doing damage control. But that can be such a powerful piece. It was the same thing for me. I have gluten. I have my set of symptoms that I get. One of them is dizziness for sure. Like clockwork.
Yeah.
I'll get that. I'll feel like I'm on a boat. I'll feel disconnected from my body. Like I won't have that core stability.
Yes.
And I didn't have it for years, kind of similar. And that's actually how I, in my opinion, what set me up for disc injuries. So I have 2 really pretty substantial disc bulges in the bottom of my low back, and I'm strongly feel that it was because I didn't have that stability, because my brain wasn't controlling my postural muscles the right way.
Yeah.
No core strength. It was a joke. No matter how many core exercises I did back then, because my chemistry was still too off. It wasn't until I, cleaned up the diet and did all that other stuff with my chemistry that it started to really kind of snowball in the right way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the immune system and the inflammation can target so many things, because even before that, when you were talking about autoimmunity, I have a lot of people that are listening to this that are probably moms or parents, and they might have heard of pandas before.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit to that and what that is?
So that's an autoimmune reaction that is, you usually use, the best way to test for that is the Cunningham panel, but it's an autoimmune response towards those dopaminergic receptors, and it squashes that brake pedal, like it's gone basically.
Yeah.
And this is the most severe case of tics that you'll see in a patient. Basically, they're the ones that they're just not in control of anything there, and it's like a constant thing, and it looks exhausting for them. They're constantly whipping their neck. They're constantly having to vocalize, and it's a really sad situation, but it's usually driven from some sort of inflammatory driver. Yeah. So things like antibiotics, things like and vaccinations, I've seen them do it too. And then infections for sure. They're the most common reason infections will drive it. Like things like strep is like the most common one that people talk about.
Yeah. Because that's the challenging thing. I work with so many people that are not a fan of pharmaceutical drugs. And, I believe in the power of herbs, and there's so many ways to treat things. But then I also have people that know that they have strep and then they won't treat it at all.
Right.
And it has to be treated on some level, I believe, whether you're going the antibiotic route, but then, you can have a reaction to it, or if you're doing herbs or something. But if you don't, that infection can absolutely just lead to long-term just activation of the immune system. And autoimmunity, just in case you guys did not watch my autoimmune episode, is when the immune system targets itself, autoimmune. And it could be from a food, like gluten can do that to your cerebellum. It could be from an infection. It could be from a toxin. It could be from your genetic predisposition. It could be from all sorts of stuff. But for someone who was diagnosed with pandas, and I do have some moms in my world that this is on their radar because their child was fully normal, completely normal. And then one day they just wake up and they have a completely different child who might even be violent towards them.
Right.
And that's because of their lack of ability to inhibit that desire.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's basically like spot on. You lose regulation of your body.
Yeah.
It's
scary.
It's doing its own thing. And those individuals are basically prisoners in their own body. And it's like exhausting for them.
Yeah.
So
that is exhausting. But then, there's things you can do, of course, which is exactly why we're having this conversation, to empower people that, there's ways that you can turn the brain on and off. There's ways that you can create new pathways, but also the metabolic piece, the inflammatory piece is huge. And we didn't even say the word neuroplasticity, but that's essentially what this is.
Yeah. But with that, I will say, because we've worked with pandas in the past, historically, they have to get the inflammatory stuff taken care of, the chemistry stuff first.
Yeah.
There's many cases where we have neurological conditions that come through, or just symptoms, and we can work with them right off the bat. They don't necessarily need to have the metabolic stuff under control yet. And then there's some that just don't have metabolic issues. But with pandas, things like that, they have to get that piece taken care of first. Otherwise, we, again, can't build the house. Like, there's no things that we do will potentially just be like, damage control best we can. But yeah, that piece is so important for them to take care of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just think to the kids that are probably having, full-blown rage attacks to their mom for not giving them Skittles or going to Burger King or whatever it is. But really, that's the last thing that they need.
Right.
But,
it's tough.
It is tough.
Yeah.
But it's huge.
Yeah, I feel bad for I feel for the parents too. It's not easy for anybody. And like you're saying, when you're in those situations, it's hard. I'm sure some of them might be well aware of the things that should be helping, but they're in these situations where they're in knee-jerk response, mode, and they're just trying to satisfy the situation best they can as quick as they can. So sometimes they turn to the more convenient stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I was a rage monster growing up. I was a bad girl.
Too.
You couldn't control these emotions if you tried.
That's another thing that when I get gluten, it's like road rage instantly.
Yes.
Yeah, don't be around me. I feel bad. I'm gonna displace it somewhere.
Yeah.
So just put me in a room and leave me alone for a while.
For sure. Yeah. Mine comes out in all sorts of ways. I'll check out my road rage just being a New Yorker. It's just in there. It's just in there naturally with these California drivers. But anywho.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I would love to just take a brief little walk through the main parts of the brain, aka the walnut, so that we can talk about some functional things that could show up that people might not realize is a sign that that part of the brain wants a little bit more love. And also something that I want to stress is that, yes, we're talking about how metabolically you need to be in a good place, but if your brain is brilliant and your body is phenomenal, and it will create new pathways to strengthen what you're asking it to strengthen. So everything that we're talking about are things that you probably see often and that help people work through. So I would love to just take that little stroll through the brain.
Sure. So why don't we start with going back to anxiety?
Cool.
All right. Like we talked about, that basal ganglia being a gas pedal, brake pedal, that's one of the main networks that anxiety funnels through. And anxiety originates the main point or hub of it is our amygdala. The amygdala is the fear and anxiety center. If we don't have that, we don't have any. But when that thing is lit up, it will give you anxiety, right? And it drives through that gas and brake pedal. So a lot of people, there's many different reasons why people can have anxiety. Most people are familiar with external factors, psychological, right? But realistically, if you think about it from a stance of all you really need to do is light that part of the brain up, or something needs to activate that, then technically there might be other ways that area can be excited. So one of the things, I think Datis was the one that had mentioned this. There's an article showing that there are actually what are known as cytokine receptors on the amygdala. And it is basically those cytokines, when they attach to it, they're driven by it, or some of them are driven by inflammation, right? They're signaling agents, right? And they can attach to the amygdala and potentially activate it. So when inflammation is up in certain situations, it can potentially ping the fear and anxiety center to go. And this actually connects into another article or piece of school of thought now in the literature where the way stress pathways work, right? So with that, we know that stress it can drive what's known as your sympathetic nervous system. And that's basically your fight or flight or survival mode that you go into, right? And that's one arm of it. So we have a neurological response to stress, and it's going to go down that sympathetic nervous system, and that's that fight or flight pathway. The other arm of it is actually an endocrine response. So you have a hormonal response, and you develop a stress hormone signaling to your adrenals to create cortisol.
Yay.
Right? And most of us know of cortisol as a steroid hormone that is used for being anti-inflammatory. So we take things like prednisone or cortisone to put out inflammation or to calm down the fire, right? So one side is putting out the fire or having this stress hormone response and being anti-inflammatory. The other one signals that brain or the survival mode, that fight or flight, and that's actually going to signal down to your immune system. So this is how the brain connects to the immune system to actually produce inflammation. So it's going to crank that up. The fire gets turned up on one side, and then it gets balanced out or put out by the other side of it, the endocrine side. Now, over time, people that are dealing with chronic stress, or if the stress is bad enough, that hormonal response, your body won't respond to it the way it's supposed to. It'll potentially become intolerant to it, or it'll kind of like a insulin resistance. You'll be resistant to it. Okay. And then that inflammatory side, that survival mode, will go unchecked. And what it's going to do, the inflammation is going to go right back up and ping your brain saying that there's stress.
Perfect.
It's going to ping a stress response. And then it's going to create this positive feedback loop. So that's how you have two different pieces of literature showing how inflammation by itself can potentially ramp up that stress loop or that fear and anxiety center. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
And from there, basically, like we were talking about, there's a lot of things that help regulate that gas pedal, and you can use things like your frontal lobes or your cerebellum to try to combat anxiety. In addition to that, the other piece that opposes that survival network, that fight or flight response, is that parasympathetic, right?
Gotta love it.
They work in tandem with each other. They're always happening at the same time, realistically. It's not one or the other. But if you promote enough of the parasympathetic response, then you can, through that vagus nerve. So many people have heard the vagus nerve is like the new hot word.
It is.
Right? And all these different exercises, gargling, singing, everything that people are doing. If you stimulate that vagus nerve appropriately, it will actually pump the brakes on the sympathetic network too. And then it can be anti-inflammatory, and then also help calm down the fear and anxiety center. So this is how they suspect that when individuals are doing things like vagus nerve stimulation or different activities that stimulate the vagus network, like meditation and whatnot, it's helping with calming down the anxiety centers from, at least from a neurological stance. There's probably many other reasons why it's happening, but
Yeah.
does that make sense?
It does. And I love that you went into that, because I think that so many people, they hear that eating well and drinking clean water and being mindful of toxic exposures and decreasing inflammation is helpful for, maybe headaches or period cramps or their gut or something like that. But people don't always connect how that could be triggering your sympathetic nervous system to put you in this feeling of not being safe. Because as you were speaking, I was getting this visualization of, your cells. Your cells are like little mini universes that then make us up as a whole.
Right.
And if your cells don't feel safe because they're under attack from a toxin, it's going to set off that alarm signal throughout every single cell of your body, and you will not be able to feel safe.
Exactly.
So I love that you went into that, truly. It does make sense. And I think that people are very much involved in vagal nerve exercises, and they love doing that. And something that I was smirking about when you were talking, and I don't know if you saw me smirking, the reason why I was smirking is because of the song WAP. And everyone knows the song WAP. And she talks about the uvula, the thing that is dangling in the back of your throat. So some people never knew what the uvula was until they heard the song WAP. Can you please tell our beautiful listeners and watchers what you might see in your uvula if you have a significant functional neurological imbalance, or just imbalance in the brainstem?
Yeah, so that's hilarious.
I know. Thank
how
you.
We got here.
Yes, that's how we got here. Yes.
So the uvula, one of the tests that we'll often do with patients is just testing palatal responses. So in the back of our throat, or just in front of it, there's a soft palate. So the part that attaches to our teeth is known as the hard palate, and then right behind that is the soft palate. And there's these little, they're like kind of like parachutes. So when a doctor says go you're gonna see these pouches go up and out, right? And theoretically, they're supposed to do this symmetrically. Of course, we have some structural shifts and stuff like that, or like asymmetries that exist in all of us. But for the most part, these guys should just go up and out at the same time and evenly. And if they don't, and one side does not do its job and one does, then you're gonna see that uvula, that little tonsil guy in the back, shift to one direction versus the other. And that can be a clue into function of the lower brainstem, things like the vagus nerve. So we use that as one of the tests to give us insight into that lower brainstem function, and how one of the many things that could be pointing towards, hey, you might need to work on that vagus network or that parasympathetic system.
Yeah.
So we tie that in, of course, with a bunch of other stuff, but because we can't hang our head on one test.
For sure.
Yeah, but it is one really good test that you can look into.
What if someone tells you that they don't have a gag response at all?
It's another really good clue. So we got sensory nerve, cranial nerve 9, and then 10 is the vagus nerve, and they work together in that gag response. So if the gag reflex is not there, then again, you're looking at lower brainstem, and that could potentially be tied to some condition or dysfunction. All we know is at the very basic level, it's not running at optimal. Okay.
Yeah. And for me, I work a lot on the gut, and you are working on the gut, of course, and what you're doing from the neurological pathways. But I have so many patients that don't poop. And it could be that their sweet little vagus nerve isn't firing that peristaltic movement down.
Right.
Or, they aren't making digestive enzymes. So now they're bloating and nothing is moving. So this not only is playing into the nervous system, it's playing into, your nervous system touches every cell of your body. It's changing your organ function, your physiology. So I just did want to touch upon that in case people are like, I don't have anxiety. I don't need to look at this. You do. It's not just anxiety.
Honestly, it's pretty wild when you understand the wiring and you introduce the therapy, and then you see an instant change. So things like you'll do things to influence the vagus nerve, and we'll maybe do a little stim or whatever it might be, or vibration or whatever it is, and we'll immediately start hearing gurgles, sounds. Whereas before that, we'll go in with a stethoscope and listen, and it's a ghost town. We can't hear anything in there, and it matches up exactly with their symptoms. I haven't had a bowel movement in a week, whatever it is, right? Yeah, so it's pretty trippy when you start playing with stuff, how much it can influence things right on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The brain-gut connection is real. The brain-everything connection, but I love the brain-gut connection.
Right. I feel you. I'm a little biased too.
Yeah, it's nice. It's helped. So I would love to talk about just some things that people might not think are related to brain that are related to the brain. So you mentioned road rage. What about someone that goes off to battle and then comes back and can't control their emotions at all? What could have happened to this person?
So the deep part of our brain, like we talked about, there's the amygdala there. That's that fear and anxiety center, right? Coupled with that, there's actually emotional centers that sit there, or the hippocampus. So a lot of memory and emotion, they're interwoven. And with any given situation, we're creating an emotional stamp on everything that we're doing. And some things are a lot more potent than others. So when we go to these, when we're experiencing these extreme situations that are traumatic, the emotional stamp is really high, or it's going to be really potent, and the memories are going to be super vivid. And everything that you're feeling, smelling, touching, tasting, seeing, every one of your senses that has a memory, or is going to be tied to that memory. Does that make sense? So when these individuals come back from, let's say, overseas, and they're at battle, or in war, or whatever it might be, and they'd seen some things or experienced some really traumatic events, any one of those sensations, if they experience it again, can trigger the event. Okay. So it's because of these memories that our brain has concreted or cemented into us, because our brain's job is to keep us alive. That's its one goal.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't care about how happy you are, or whether or not you want to go travel, or whatever it is. Its goal is to keep you alive. So with that, it's going to make sure that it keeps a really good memory of the things, or catalog of everything that could be harmful to you, could kill you, basically. Okay. So if it thinks that traumatic event is very dangerous, it's going to put it higher priority, and you're going to know exactly when something is similar to it. It's going to recognize the pattern, and it's going to reach back from that catalog and say, nope, let's bail. Either curl up into a ball and pass out, or run, or fight, basically. So you can experience any number of different emotions based on that. Some people, when they have these stressful events and whatnot, they go into more of they want to go vasovagal. They want to pass out. It's all that polyvagal theory stuff, right? So they want to curl up in a ball. Others go into full rage, and they're gonna fight for themselves. And you don't know when it's gonna happen, and where they might end up having to take out that emotion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's essentially the physiology as far as familiar with it.
Yeah, that was a great physiological walkthrough for sure. And some people don't realize what kind of arm of that polyvagal system is going to fire until they're in a situation and then see it happening. I know that for me, and I've talked about this on the podcast, so I don't care. After I haven't seen you in a long time, I had a stalker for a little bit of time. It was gnarly. I've never had my life threatened in that way where I felt like I was being hunted. It was crazy. Truly, I've never had anything like that before. Wild. But I am a fainter. I didn't know. I had no idea that I was a fainter. I'm like a feisty little lion. I thought that I would be a fighter, but I'm not. Just go right to bed.
I would never expect that.
I know. I'm just full of surprises, Cam. Just full of them.
Dad, I'm sorry you had to deal with that. That's crazy.
Thanks. It just turned me into a little ninja. Now I own a gun. It's great. Just so anyone watching, I have a gun now. So please don't come to my house. Yeah, it's the truth.
Do what you got to do.
Yeah, you do what you got to do. Yeah. But I also work with people and even have some people in my life that I'm not going to share this story, but I know someone very closely who is, fully functioning, just, typical yogi, and she hit her head really hard. Never been the same. Can you talk a little bit about concussion and what happens in a concussion?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Yeah, no, you'll do great.
So concussion, essentially what happens with it is, it's a trauma to the brain, or it's an injury to the brain. Concussion gets categorized under the mild category because there can be moderate or severe, where it's basically the way they grade it through moderate and severe typically is because there's some sort of a bleed or a fracture in the skull or whatever it is. Okay. With a mild one or a concussion, they don't have good consistent ways or a gold standard way of measuring the concussion. It's basically like an invisible injury, so they can't visibly see what the damage is to the brain. Does that make sense? So it's happening at a microscopic level, and they haven't had or developed like good reproducible tools for it. But there's many ways we can get there. Some of them are through actually when we hit the head, right? So the brain sits inside the skull. The skull is kind of like a helmet for it. It's suspended in fluid, the brain is, all right? So it's floating around inside of our heads. There's, of course, other structures that are helping keeping it in place, but just for the example, it's floating in the fluid, and when you shake it hard enough, it will contact the skull. So it's going to hit a part of the skull. So if I slam my head forward, or if I fall forward and I hit my head, my brain is going to shift forward and then slam the front of the skull. Okay, so that's what's called like a coup injury. And then the counter coup to that is the brain's actually going to potentially slide back and then slam into the back of the skull, because just the way the forces transfer. Okay, and it's logical to think, or reasonable to think, well, if I hit the front of my head, that's where my injury is, right? The piece that people don't think about is the fact that it's going to whip back and then could damage the other parts. So wherever you hit the skull, that's where the brain could get bruised or injured and give you symptoms. So that's really part of why concussion in itself can be so, there's such a variety of symptoms that you can get, because the brain it has its fingers in every function, basically. So it really is, your symptoms are dictated based off of where the injury happens. So there's no cookie cutter deal for these patients. And it's another reason why, or part of the reason why, they don't get good quick diagnoses either, and good proper help for their condition, because people are being pushed through cookie cutter systems, or they're being just told to rest.
Yeah.
In addition to that more common conventional thought of the counter coup injury, there's also a stretch injury that is much less talked about. So if you imagine the brain, it's basically a bundle of wires. And those wires, when we're developing, so when we're an embryo and then when we're newborns, the stuff that's the largest is going to be the brainstem and the spinal cord. That's like the most robust. Okay, those areas are subconscious or reflexive. Basically, you don't have to think about it for those to work. They're in charge of your survival. There's where your vital centers live, and it's all happening without you having to think about it. Things like breathing, blood pressure, heart rate, eye control, balance coordination, all that stuff is funneling through there and working on autonomously without you having to think about it. Okay, as we develop, those wires sprout up like a vegetable. So it starts out with the stem, and then it sprouts up, and it develops a brain.
A walnut.
Yeah, the walnut. The walnut gets delicious. So the brain gets formed, and then it looks like a solid structure, but it's, again, like millions of wires bundled together that started through the stem and the spinal cord. And the reason why that's important is because with this stretch injury, what it's doing, if you can imagine that vegetable and you're tugging on the vegetable to pull it out of the ground, what part's going to snap or potentially get injured?
I hope I answered this right. The stem?
The stem.
Okay, great. Yes,
Stem
the
is
stem.
the weakest point, so it's the most likely to get injured. So if you imagine the brain is like that vegetable and there's a stem to it, when it sloshes around in the brain, if you slosh it around enough or hard enough in the wrong vector, then that stem is potentially going to get an injury too. So they call it a stretch injury or a diffuse axonal injury. Same thing with the spinal cord. It can get injured that way. So that's why when you see like certain football players and stuff like that, they have these responses with, like posturing in their body or numbness and tingling throughout their body and stuff like that. It could be because they injured the spinal cord from a stretch injury.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's another form of how you can get a concussion, right?
Yeah.
Where were we going next?
I just have a quick question for you. Will you let your future child, if you have one, play football?
Woo. If I do, it'll be later.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be much later because the research shows that, this stuff is dose dependent. It's exactly like smoking. So the more you do it, the more likely you'll have the chance of developing what's called CTE.
Yeah.
And that's basically like you're getting a traumatic form of dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And that's just, you don't want that you don't want to wish that on anybody.
No.
Right? So those that started football later, much later, like senior year of high school type of thing, they don't have CTE, or it's like much less likelihood that they're going to have that kind of thing happen.
Yeah.
Plus, I think by that time, like whenever I have kids, by that time, I'm sure the technology and the precautions are going to be much better placed, but, and the kid's going to be well aware of the consequences too.
Yeah.
So I'm planning on raising a wise kid.
You'll raise a really wise kid. My future husband, if you're listening, whoever you are, and my future child, you will not be playing football.
Yeah.
You will just not be doing it.
That's probably the better choice.
Yeah. I respect your choice.
I would prefer
I do.
not
Yeah.
to have them play football, but I'm also not going to fight them on stuff because
That's
I
nice.
want to have a kid that's going to,
Yeah.
think it through and come to his own decision that,
Yeah.
it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I'm going to be a crazy mom. I know this going in. So it's just sorry, little baby. I'm going to protect your little walnut.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. Something that you said when you were talking about getting hit in the head or you said something along the lines of that there's a clear imprint of the symptom based on where you are in the brain. And I think that is one of the coolest things about what you do is that based on what someone is presenting with, you can find where the brain is not functioning as well as it should, whether there's, quote unquote, a pathology there, or if it's more of a functional just imbalance or something that isn't firing the way that it should. Because I think that that's one of the most empowering things is what you do is that you can find it, you can turn it back on, and then you watch whatever they walked in the room with completely shift, which proves to you that you found it.
Yeah. So this is like, I was just talking to someone yesterday about this. This is like the disconnect between conventional and neuroscience, where things are at, right? Right now, the way they look at their tests or standard neurologist and all this stuff, they're going to try to pick out pathology, disease, something that's like physically changed there. There's a stroke, you have Alzheimer's, whatever it is, there's an obvious shift, and you're going to have these set of findings when you do that, right? Nobody's looking at the exam is, in addition to that, a dying art. So the physical exam, not enough people are doing it, and not enough people are doing all of it.
I mean, virtually is how most people are working these days. They don't even take the vitals of their patients.
So most concussions are usually just diagnosed because of the history. They're just asking them about stuff. Like I've seen many times where the athletic trainer at a event, like sporting event, did a better job examining the kid than the actual doctor did.
Good.
That's not to say that there aren't really good doctors out there.
Yeah,
there are some phenomenal ones that do a better exam. But that being said, they don't, this is where it's a little more, I'd say our specialty, this is where we kind of shine. Our school of thought with this is that there are findings, like you're saying. It's just that they're not black and white. They're in that gray area. There are subtle shifts that have happened in the system. The injury, like if you concuss somebody, it's not enough to see it on the scan or an image potentially, but there's an injury there. So if you think about it, like it's operating at 100% before the injury, maybe it only gets knocked down to like 70%. And maybe you don't see it on a scan until it's at like 30. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's been a shift away from optimal, and this doesn't have to just be with a head injury, it can be with anything. You could be in that gray area and you're going to fall through the cracks because nobody's finding anything with you. But if somebody decides to look in that gray area and say, there's a pattern here, and I know the wiring pretty well or the physiology pretty well to know that this is likely where it's happening. And then, okay, we're going to try treatment for what's good for this area and then see what happens to your symptoms. And sure enough, like we've talked about, that's when you could potentially see some amazing things happen for them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. So just because I'm sure some of my listeners have no idea, what is your treatment typically like? What do you do? How do you treat these things? Do you just crack a bone?
No. Yeah. So you're right. That's a really common misconception. So adjustments can be really powerful tools. They're powerful brain inputs because you're stimulating what are called mechanoreceptors in the body. But we only use adjustments when it's the right time and place. It's not very common that when we're working with these neurological conditions that we're doing a lot of like structural work on patients. So a lot of the rehab is not really unique to us. We've pulled from other specialties that have done a phenomenal job of progressing neuroscience and neuro rehab. Places like optometry, like neurooptometry specifically with vision therapy. You've got vestibular therapists, different PTs that help develop that whole realm. You've got other type like speech pathology, OT, like all the stuff that exists for neurology and especially just neuroscience research. We pull from all of it to try to develop therapies. And then this is also pretty unique to us. I'm sure there are other disciplines that do this, but we get pretty creative with how we approach it.
Yes.
Because we know what the wire, like how the wiring works and what it's in charge of. Basically anything can be an exercise or a therapy. It's just you need to know what area you need to rehab. If you know the area, then you can give somebody math and that's all they do, and that potentially gets them feeling better, and maybe they don't feel paresthesia or numbness and tingling in the left side of their or the right side of their body anymore. Or maybe they can tell between left and right now, directions wise and stuff like that. Like once you know the wiring, you can really get super creative, and that's like the fun part. Yeah.
That is the fun part. I mean, I would love watching you guys just create these different things for patients and seeing how it would shift things for them, because it's not, the therapies are something that you give them instructions to do at home. They come into the office and they get treatment, but then they get these brain exercises to do at home, and ultimately that's creating new neuroplastic foundations for them to function.
And it's a lot like physical therapy in that sense that in the beginning it's a lot more active on the practitioner's part. It's a lot more passive for the patient in the beginning. They're just kind of they're having to go in more frequently and learn how to do things, and then we're building them up to a point where they can do it at home more frequently. So it starts to shift and taper onto more on their plate and less in with us, because we don't want to see people forever. That is definitely not our goal. So we want to move you along the continuum so that you can live independently again, be happy with where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
what if someone was coming to you and they're in your office and you're doing an exercise? So say you're doing finger to nose or something, because that was something that I would do to strengthen my cerebellum.
Yeah.
And used to not be able to find my nose, just fun fact for you guys. And what if they were doing it and they were killing it and they were getting better, and then 30 seconds in, they can't find your finger or their nose anymore? What would that make you think if they were initially getting better and then all of a sudden couldn't do it?
Like in the same visit?
In the same visit.
Oh, that would tell me that we're reaching a point of fatigue. So there's many different reasons why this can happen. Like no matter what, everything you do, like if you're even if you're a marathon runner and stuff like that, you're going to hit a point, a wall where you can't keep going. Like it's not a good idea. You're going to potentially damage something, or you're going to need a lot of rest afterwards as a result of it, and you're going to be fatigued. But that kind of thing can be also shortened compared to what a healthy person should have due to other factors like the metabolic stuff, all the chemistry. So these tissues, like you need proper hormone function, proper blood flow, proper oxygenation, proper nutrition, all these things to be able to have the energy production and whatnot to be able to control those systems, control the nerves that are doing these functions. So if it starts to fatigue out early, that would be a sign or an indicator like, hey, something might be a little bit off metabolically. That, or if they damage the nerves enough, or there's not enough of them able to do the job, you might see fatigue early as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I know for me, that was a big part of when I was in this world, my journey, because like I said earlier, I was vegan and, to each their own, eat what you want to eat, but I refused to supplement. I just thought that I would get everything I needed from my cast iron pan and eating spinach. And that did not work. It did not work at all. And then little did I know that I had parasites that were eating all my iron. So needless to say, my sweet little brain was very, very fatigued, and I would notice that I didn't have the capacity that I should. But I also work with so many people, and I think it's just part of this collective consciousness that do more, go harder, keep, do more high intensity. But really, that's not how the brain heals, and that's not how any system of our body heals. So I love that that's a part of what you do, and reminding people to rest and honoring their limit, because you could push it too far and now you're just stressing the system.
It's literally, again, I have this conversation with every patient, and I try to stress it. And we just met with a physical therapist yesterday as well. It was really cool chatting with her a bit, but we were talking about this concept because we'll get often patients that have gone through some sort of brain injury program, or any type of neuro rehab, and they're getting pushed past their limits. This concept of fatigability isn't one that's conventional. There are some therapists and PTs and stuff that'll pick it out intuitively and know that they shouldn't push past this, and then others that'll just give people like 500 eye movements that they've got to do, and the patient's getting flared up and anxiety and want to pass out and like all this stuff after like 100, and they tell them to keep pushing through. And it's no different than if you're weight training or whatever it is, and you're trying to go past rep 10, but that's your max. You could make things like, you could injure yourself, but you can make yourself feel like crap after that. Like it's going to be less coordinated. It's going to be less stable. You're setting yourself up for failure, basically. Right. And then again, you might need a long time to recover as a result of that. And you might be jumping back into working out the next day. Yeah. This is a common thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm sure that you have to have that conversation with your patients all the time.
It's frustrating. No, not with the patient part. It's not that part I don't mind, like having to or educate them and teach them about that. It's frustrating that that's the way things are set up right now. That piece there's a disconnect there. Yeah.
I had a patient this week that works 80 hours. She doesn't eat until 4 p.m. and just coming in with all these issues. And I'm like, all right, well, I don't know what you want me to give you today, but we're going to start with breakfast and and taking some things off your plate and going from there. But really, those things make a huge difference on every little arm of the body. So I would love to just talk about a couple things that people might not think are brain-based, but could be coming from the brain symptom-wise. Okay. I know we talked about dizziness, but anything else that you... to blow some minds of these listeners, being like, that might be me. Car sickness, like we said, is one. Car sickness, seasickness. Right. I think people just think that that's going to be their fate forever.
That's a big one. Maybe we can talk a little bit about like just fatigue.
Yeah. Yes. That's a great one. Okay. Yes.
There's a lot of different things that could be happening with the brain with fatigue. I'm going to touch on a couple.
Cool.
Okay. One of them that we were discussing before is dysautonomia, POTS. Essentially, the way that one works, and it's become a lot more conventionally well known now, unfortunately, thanks to COVID. But fortunately for those that are suffering with POTS or dysautonomia, they have more, like the awareness has gone up, so everything else has gone up as a result.
What is POTS for them?
POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And basically what it is, if you've ever gone from like a seated to standing position and you've gotten lightheaded, that's because there's not enough blood flow getting up to the brain. Okay, so some people, it's more serious than others. Most cases, it's benign, like that's happened. Like you might need to hydrate a little more, you might need to get your blood sugar up, whatever it might be. Okay, but with others, it's an actual condition where they have it more permanent. It's happening on a consistent basis. It could be from even just sitting up, like they're just sitting and they're not getting enough blood flow up to their brain. And if you can imagine, then you're not getting enough fuel up there. It wouldn't be far-fetched for everything that this thing is in charge of to not work well. So you could feel fatigued. You could also feel brain fog. That's another big one.
Huge.
Right? So you could feel slower, right? All these things can happen here. And basically what ends up happening is the body's going to try to compensate by speeding up the heart rate. So, or that's what should happen. Blood pressure drops and you're going to speed up your heart. Okay. And it doesn't have to just be a drop in blood pressure. It can also be that the blood pressure is too high up in the brain too. So the vessels have constricted too much and you're not able to push the blood up because the piping is too small. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So either way, in both scenarios, you're not getting blood flow up and it's due to autonomic dysfunction. That's the system that helps control or helps regulate that blood pressure and the heart rate and all those, the circulation basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one way we can end up with general fatigue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another way, so going back to head injuries. There are certain areas that help us be who we are. One of them is the frontal lobes. Like that basically gives us our personality, right? It's also how we, like one key area that helps us self-motivate and all these kinds of things, right? If you damage that, it can impact your mood, it can impact your energy levels, and that can trickle into you potentially going into a depression and all these things. It can make it easier for you to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you damage certain parts of the brainstem that help with neurotransmitter conversion. So neurotransmitters are brain chemicals that help stimulate certain parts of the brain. And certain ones are in charge of different functions. Dopamine would be a good one to go back to because we've touched on that so many times.
Yeah.
It's that one that helps with that drive, that self-motivation, all that kind of stuff, right? The top of the brainstem is where most of that's converted. And if that gets damaged, you might see shifts with that.
Yeah.
You might feel different, right?
Yeah.
Same thing at the top of the brainstem, you've got norepinephrine that also gets converted around there. And if you hit both, it can really throw off your chemistry or throw off the way you feel and make you feel potentially fatigued because you need both of those to light up many parts of the brain,
Yeah.
not just the brainstem.
Your statements have inspired too many questions in my brain right now, so I'm going to try to just let them come out. We'll see how they come out. It's just interesting because so many people then are put on SNRIs or different medications to augment those neurotransmitters to go to the brain, but really the issue isn't that they're not staying in the synapses long enough. The issue could be deeper down in the brainstem, that they're just not producing them as much. And then you take a medication like this and it's altering receptors and whatnot. So how does that play into what you do if someone's on a medication like an SNRI or an SSRI or something that augments dopamine or even something like Adderall? Can we talk about Adderall?
Oof. Oh, man.
I know. Do you recommend Adderall?
That is
my followers know how I feel about it, so I'm just curious if you would recommend it.
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, why? Why aren't you a fan of meth?
I'm not a fan of medication in general. Typically, most cases, right? I do know that it has its time and place for emergencies and all that stuff, but the side effects from Adderall are pretty nasty that I've seen.
Yeah, and from like a brain-based place, because you also said that you had ADHD, so that was something that you chose not to be medicated for.
Right, you're basically dumping a whole pile of neurotransmitters into the brain and hoping that it's going to do something good. Basically, you're just pouring a more disgusting soup into it and hoping it's going to work. When shown time after time that that's not how it's done.
Yes.
Like that's not what's happening in the brain.
Thank you.
Right?
Yes.
So you can't chuck shit at the wall and expect it to stick.
No, you can't.
You might see some changes in function, but you're not getting to the root of the issue, and you're potentially causing more harm over time. And you're definitely going to change the way the brain compensates and tries to adapt and do it on its own, basically. So you're crutching it on top of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then you're gonna have to unwind other loops that get involved as a result of the meds.
Yes.
So that's a historical thing. The one that's a really big one with regards to plasticity is anything that's GABAergic. So anything that's influencing GABA is going to make it typically so that we've found historically when people are on something like a benzodiazepine or something like that pushes GABA or that GABA system, it's hard for us to build plasticity.
Yeah.
It's like almost impossible sometimes. We see that a lot with like dizziness cases and anxiety cases and stuff like that. It's very, very tricky to build plasticity in the brain when patients are on that stuff.
Would you say the same thing of people that are drinking?
Oh yeah, 100%. No, we won't even work with patients if they're going to stay on, like if they're going to keep drinking or smoking. Like those are hard no's for us. Yeah, because we know that we're going to be wasting their time. Yeah, like they're going to be wasting like their resources, and we're going to be wasting our time trying to work on a case that we know that's very likely to fail. Yeah. Rehab wise. So
another question that came up while you were talking is about scrolling and what that's doing to the eyes, just up and down scrolling, and then what that's doing to dopamine. Can you just give us a little truth bomb on that? Knowledge bomb?
I can give you my observation, but there's probably a lot better observations from some of my colleagues.
I want yours.
With this stuff, but anytime you're using a vertical eye movement, you're stimulating the dopamine pathways. Yeah. On top of that, typically when we're on our phones, we're converging our eyes.
Yes.
That's another dopaminergic type of activity. So you're really pushing dopamine on a consistent basis, on top of the fact that typically when we're scrolling, we're looking at stuff that's pinging our reward centers on a high concentration, high volume. So you're doing 3 in 1, and you only have so much for your system to use in terms of dopamine. So if you burn it out scrolling, doing all those activities, you're going to have a lot less over for anything else. And it's pretty easy to basically melt into the couch doing that activity as a result and not want to go do anything else. Maybe you don't go to the gym that day. Maybe you don't even get up to cook. Maybe you're ordering Uber Eats now because you started scrolling. So that's part of that's theory, part of that's where the research is actually a lot of this stuff. But we know that vertical eye movements and convergent type or depth type of work with your eyes, they stimulate dopamine pathways for sure. Yeah.
Future husband, our child, will not have a cell phone until high school. They will never have TikTok. They will never have Instagram, and they will never play football, just so you know. I just can't do it. But I'm happy that you spoke to that, just because I've even seen people in my life become so addicted to their phones that I've watched their personality change. And I think that it is due to that dopamine piece. And there's actually a word for it now, and I wouldn't know because I'm not hip and I don't know anything that's going on in the world. But there's a term now for people that cannot leave their bed because they are scrolling. And it's something that's coming on for this new generation. I know. It's like a TikTok trend. And I'm only on TikTok for this podcast, in which those of you on TikTok know that I don't know how to even use it. So
yeah, I don't have it either.
Yeah, no idea. Don't need to get on it, truly. But that's a real thing where it's truly people scrolling in their bed where they say that they can't get out of bed because they have no motivation. And this is why, because they have no dopamine left. And then people crave dopamine. So then maybe they'll have a huge coffee, or maybe then they'll do, X, Y, and Z to try to get a little boost. But really, it's just because they've burned through all of it by
And it's like you're saying, it's never going to be the hard stuff that they seek out. It's always going to be the stuff that gives them the instant fix, right? So it's the unfortunate disaster that's happening with society.
So what are some endogenous, good, healthy ways to boost dopamine?
Just find an activity that's going to take a while for you to get the reward.
Ooh.
And actually do it.
Ooh, a while to get the reward.
Maybe it's some art project. Maybe it's you're writing something. Maybe you're training for something. Maybe you're cooking a larger meal. Yeah, where you actually have to spend like an hour to do it. Something like, things that are going to take time.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. And it's a much healthier dose or curve that you're going to see with your dopamine. And you're not going to have as big of a crash or anything like that. You won't necessarily have that big drop off and trough.
Yeah.
As a result.
Yeah, the drops don't feel good in anything.
Nope.
But definitely not dopamine.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes me think, just with my background in dance too, is, you're moving and you're dancing, but the reward is when you nail it and when everyone's doing it at the same time and coordinated. And that takes the whole class. You don't just walk in there and get it. You get it at the very end and then practicing. So that's fun to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. What are some natural ways to support GABA other than taking a benzo or drinking a bottle of wine?
Meditation.
Yay.
Mindset work. Anything where, even going on a walk. Mm-hmm. Okay. Specifically in nature, right?
You like nature. Not looking at your phone while you're walking, you mean?
Not looking at your phone.
Yeah.
Because you basically you need to get out of your own head, and that's going to help shut down the voices in your head and all that, like that self-talk or internal talk that people have. You can, from a natural stance, also, again, working on activities that require heavy focus for longer durations. They're going to help build up the GABA network. Okay.
Yeah. That's almost a hidden talent these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just feeds right into that same thing. It's the dopamine system responds to something that's better or healthier to something that you're focusing on long term. And then you'll get the reward at the end.
Yeah.
So they all work more effectively that way. Yeah. And won't let you crash and feel like crap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's what we're looking for.
So
for someone who was diagnosed with ADHD, if they were to just do something that would set them up for a successful daily routine or something that they could integrate into their day to help with stimulating frontal lobe, cerebellum, whatever it is, what would you recommend that they do other than take meth in the morning when they wake up? I know, I'm unfiltered. I told you. I warned you, Cam. I fucking warned you. Welcome.
At the very least, go for a walk outside.
Yeah, okay.
It goes back to even, getting sun is a good idea, right? But going out for a walk in nature, preferably away from people if possible.
Yeah, let's get away from the people.
You're going to, things are going to quiet down. Leave your phone at home. Leave your phone away from you if you can. The longer you're away from it, you'll have withdrawals initially. That's what's going to happen. It's that dopamine system going wild, right? But after it's been gone long enough, you're going to be in more control. You're going to be back in the driver's seat, and then you'll be able to basically navigate where you want to go, as opposed to being a slave to your phone.
Yes.
So,
yes. I love that.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you how many people are like, I just need Adderall. And I just roll my eyes. I'm like, you don't need Adderall. You don't need it. You might need a lot of other things and a lot of lifestyle changes and a lot of shifts, but I don't think that anyone needs Adderall.
Yeah. I mean, nothing good ever came easy, right?
No.
Both of our paths were hard for getting our health in check. It's
really hard.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it.
Yeah, and I'm still working on it every single day.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process, and we're always trying to grow and stay as healthy as we can so that we can be in control of what we do, how we do it.
And I think the world that you live in is very similar to the world that I live in that we have to identify things that we are doing that are contributing to dysfunction. And to identify those things often takes courage, and it also takes you to love yourself enough to shift it because you have to be different. You have to leave your phone at home and go on a walk. You have to, move your body in a different way. You have to sit down and do something that will focus your mind, whether that's meditating or just reading a book. Who even reads books anymore? No one. Right. I mean, I read books, but it takes you to take a look at yourself and to recognize the things that you are doing that might be causing your brain to fire in ways that you don't want it to. Because, we talked about neuroplasticity and ways that you can correct things, but you can also have negative neuroplasticity in the sense that you make...
Oh, yeah. You drive the wrong pathways.
Yeah.
You got it. And just to feed back into that phone one, because I can't stress enough how important those two things have specifically been for me and my focus. Okay. The more I'm on the phone is a direct correlation with how bad my focus is and how productive my life is. Direct correlation.
Yeah.
If I go on walks, I'm more centered, I'm more sharp, I'm better with people, I'm more, I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm more present. So yeah, you're going to be able to control your focus, because you basically need to think about these things like the phone as something that's just going to build up noise in your head, static. It's just you're going to be all over the brain. You're going to be very scatterbrained. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Beautiful.
Good stuff.
That is some good stuff. So I feel like we've been talking for a very long time, but I have so many things that I can ask you, which just means that we'll have to have you back and talk about more brain stuff. But I would love to give you the stage to share something that we haven't talked about, whether that's a knowledge bomb, a truth bomb, someone that you want to share love to who is hopefully listening to this and watching this, anything at all that you would like to share with my incredible listeners.
Don't have regrets. Get out there and do something now. I've been following Stoic philosophy a little more recently. Something that Daily Stoic has mentioned, there's a Marcus Aurelius has a quote. It's memento mori. And basically it's to keep it blunt, it's like basically we're dying, right?
Yes.
So with that in mind, you never know when death's gonna come. So treat every day like it's your last and go out and do something now. Take action now. Don't wait till tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Powerful. Simple but powerful. And it's true. We are all dying.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm just fucking with you, but it's true. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And truly, I don't think that you really do know how much you've influenced my life just by being who you are and for helping the people that you're helping. And it's always just such an honor when we get to share patients and I get to do my little work and then you get to do yours and we get to watch them change. But even just the things that I've learned about myself through observing you and other people that practice medicine the way that you do. So thank you for everything that you do. And if anyone that is watching or listening this wants to find you, how can they come work with you?
We've got our website. It's sdchironeuro.com. And that, or they can, always call or text, just Google us, San Diego Chiropractic Neurology. That's probably the easiest, and you'll have no problem getting a hold of us.
Yeah.
But thanks again for having me. This was so awesome. I love everything that you're doing. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, that means so much. Yes, it's been too fun.
Awesome.
Thanks, friends.
Take care.
I love it when you